Hey everyone, welcome back here to tcpmzone. I hope everyone is having a great week. It's Wednesday today when I'm doing this live stream here. Couple of things, I guess. What I'm going to start doing is that on Saturdays, I think we're going to do a wrap up of pretty much news, construction news, and hopefully, I'm getting everything together, and hopefully, I will be able to start this this coming Saturday, which would be the last Saturday in February. So, that being said, let's take a look at risks, like in a project. Now, I'm not going to cover every different type of risk. That's more for an in-depth video, I would think. We're just kind of, I guess, just kind of in general project risks. At the beginning of any project, even before the construction project, the design team and even the owner needs to figure out the types of risks that might come up during this project. It could be for the owner, could be financial risk. Well, it's always financial risk anything goes wrong, things like that. And so that's something that they need to plan for at every stage in every part of this of a project. The risk or risks that are involved need to be reevaluated at different stages. The owner will have his own laid out plan. The designers will have their own laid out plans, and us in the construction industry, throughout the build phase, there should be different stages at which we kind of go back and look at our risk register or wherever, however you'd like to keep track of the different risks that may happen. Now, as you know, some risks are a lot higher. Actually, most risks are a lot higher to impact the project early on. But the nice thing is that if we have a risk that becomes an issue early on in the project, it's a lot easier to mitigate it than later on in the project, because you never know if a risk does appear and become an issue later on in the project, it could affect multiple things, not just that which is directly correlated with it. But what is risk? That's the first thing. That's the first place we need to begin. We need to define risk and see what it actually is. So I'm actually gonna take a look at the Project Management Institute and see how they define it. I have it over here on my monitor. I had it on my monitor. Hold on, guys. Okay. So risk. Risk is an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on a project's objectives. Of course, the objectives are what we want our project to do, what we want it to become. So obviously, when you take on a project of building a TI or doing a TI, building an actual building from the ground up, or building an addition to a building, that is the objective. But part of that objective also to make sure the systems are running correctly, the electrical, the plumbing, the mechanical, all those different things are objectives. And as you can see, as the objectives are different, there are different risks that it can affect each one. But some of those risks will actually affect more than one trade, and therefore will cost even more to fix or to mitigate. So at the very beginning of a project, we always need to go over the risks. Now, here's the thing. If you are a well-established company, you should have a list or a database of the different things that have happened, that might actually occur. And that's where your project managers need to look to see, okay, how during this project, how will we be able to mitigate these risks? Now, not all risks will be high probability for all projects, because each project is essentially different. You could have one where you'll have more electrical issues because of the age of the building. It's a historic area that hasn't been upgraded in a while, and the electric company, whoever it may be, isn't planning on heading out there to upgrade equipment for a while. So you might have that. The plumbing, how old is the plumbing? As we all know, I'm here in Southern California. In the news within the last, I think, 3 years or 4 years, there have been old, and I mean like almost 100 years old pipes that burst in like major freaking intersections that shut down parts of the city for days at a time. Those are some big time risks that one needs to take into consideration. Of course, if the main, and I mean like the main, like 6 to 8 feet large water lines were out, at that point you really don't have much to do except for import your own water if you want your project to continue if it needs water. But if you're in the early stages, obviously that won't really affect you very much. Of course, it's going to affect any type of water for concrete work, maybe, or excavation, earthwork, things like that. You might be affected. But if that's the case, how do you mitigate that? You can bring in a water truck, and it can spread out water over the dirt, especially if you're trying to do dust control, things like that. So it is money that has to come out of your pocket, but at least it's something that's small, and like something like that is really no one's fault. So depending on how the contract and the project charter were written, it might be up to the owner to pick up the slack and to provide that water. Like I said, depends on the project. Now, just like any other project, there are inherent risks that no matter what, those risks are going to be there. Once again, how you come up with a risk management plan in order to mitigate those things, and also have a contingency fund built into the contract so that you can take stuff that happens that is pretty much falls on you. Of course, the owner is probably going to have a contingency fund that will fall on them, or for them to pull from if something happens that is on their end. So then some of the risks also happen as in scope changes. So, change orders, and those things can get out of hand depending on what it is, what's going on. Now, that being said, some of those scope changes, of course, the project manager can mitigate, and the company can mitigate because they're kind of in control a little more. So they can actually deny, say, you know what, no, that's too big of a scope change. It's going to affect a lot of trades. How about we get this project done, and then you can come back and fix whatever you want to fix, or change what you want to change. It sometimes is regulatory. You have no idea it's coming down the line. Sometimes you kind of do, but like within the last decade, especially here in Southern California, there was talk about something going on about like pollution prevention type of thing, and it was kind of up in the air. But then all of a sudden it hit, and right like smack in the middle of the year, we really didn't have much rain. But then when it started raining, there was the big push to make sure that we had everything not really covered up, but you saw a lot more places having or using the straw bales, the silt screens. I think that's what they call them, or silt screeds. I can't remember. But, to effectively, they worked for a number of reasons. To slow down the water, so it's not going so fast, and to kind of, a lot of the debris would catch, including the silt, or that was the idea at least, so that not as much of it went into the water system because it was degrading the pipes and things like that. So a lot of companies didn't have that, and all of a sudden they found out not only did they need to have this stormwater prevention or stormwater pollution prevention program, or the SWPPP, but they also had to have someone on staff that was actually certified by, I can't remember who, to actually go out there, and they're supposed to take samples and see how much silt, how many pollutants, the particles per million, and all kinds of crazy stuff. So even when it was raining, they had to go out there and make sure that the bales were still in place, and to make sure that there wasn't a lot of silt going into the drains and things like that. So it ended up costing some companies a lot of money to have all that, to be able to implement all of that at a moment's notice. So that's kind of one of those things that you really can't plan for. But from then on out, you need to build that into your contracts, into your pricing. So that, that's one of those things that you kind of can't really account for, which actually brings me to another one. Like I said, I wasn't going to go into a whole bunch of the different little things, but one big, huge thing that you guys need to make sure is that there are some times when you'll have a black swan. The black swan is things that are high impact to your project, they're hard to predict, okay, and they're gonna pretty much cost a lot of money when they do happen. So if you have something like that come up, that is a major red flag that's going to go into your library or into your database of risks that can happen, so that you can start planning for things like that. You can even set aside a rainy day fund for a rainy day so that you have that. If something happens, you have that cash on hand that you can pull from. Doesn't necessarily have to be built into the contract, although that would be great. But if you did that for every single project, you probably wouldn't be working very long, because that's just something that happens. So going back, project risk. Whenever a project is undertaken, there's risk. Whether it's you're doing something at home, a small project. Let's say you're building a small table. What are the risks involved? Not to start really bad, but you can electrocute yourself. Obviously you can cause injury. A screwdriver slips and you cut yourself. I've seen that happen. Piece of equipment is either faulty, or you can injure yourself with a piece of equipment, cut yourself. The power goes out, then you can't use any of your power tools, except for those that are run on battery, but even then for only so long until you need to charge it again. And up to the big huge commercial projects, hotels, especially hospitals. Of course, they have generators on site for emergency power, but of course those take a couple seconds to kick in and all that good stuff. And I mean, there's all kinds of different things that you really, really need to watch out for. So the whole point is that you need to make sure that when you go into a project, when you're putting it together, making your schedule, you need to keep in mind what kind of risks are we taking as we're putting this job together to do. Or on the designer side is, okay, let's take a look. What kind of risks are we looking at, in our from our scope or our point of view? What kind of risks will happen with us, or in our industry? And then let's take a look to see what, some of the risks for the construction phase, and let's see if we can mitigate some of those risks for the builder by improving our design. Now that's smart thinking. Okay, not all architects think like that, or all designers think like that. So be sure, or not be sure, but be prepared to get a little frustrated because of certain things that didn't get done or haven't been done, or for whatever reason someone said, hey, don't worry about it, we'll deal with it when it comes up. Well, yes, you have to deal with it when it comes up, but it's a lot better to prepare for it and at least have a plan to go forward or to mitigate that, so that it doesn't impact your project as much as it might have if you weren't prepared for it. Okay, so the biggest thing about risk, like I said, is mitigating it, just planning for it, and do everything in your power to avoid the risks. But it's gonna happen. That's what the Black Swan is all about. Whatever you think can't happen might actually happen. So you really have to be careful with that. And as you progress through the project, some of those risks will come down to from a very likely or a high impact to low impact as you move along, and you move past that point to low impact, and then like negligible, where, oh well, something happens, something got nicked, oh, it's no big deal, we can fix that real quick. And so at the beginning you're gonna have a lot, but like I mentioned before, throughout different stages, you could do it at each milestone. You can do it, every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, however you want to run your project, to go back and take a look. All right, this risk is no longer high impact, and this one's good. This one's been downgraded to medium impact, very low, and this one's still a high impact and very likely to happen because we're not even close to that point. It's further down the line. But sometimes as you start knocking risks off of your ledger, off of your risk assessment matrix, you start to notice that some of those risks that are further out, they'll start, their probability will start going down until you get there, and heck, they even might be negligible by then because nothing else happened that could exacerbate the problem that would have happened if you would have had that issue come up. So when it comes to risk, you have to kind of you have to think of it as being one of the aspects that you need to take care of in your monitor and control phase. You need to come back and see, all right, and reassess what can happen with the different risks as you move along. Okay, we're going to come back and reassess. All right, guys, we're going to convene in 2 weeks so we can go over this and see what has passed and what is still ahead as we inch closer and closer to these things. Okay, so just as with everything else in construction, I'd say you really shouldn't stress too much about these things. Although it can be stressful to deal with some of this stuff, by keeping it in front of you, keeping it in front of the team, you guys can help each other out and think about it and say, hey, you might even bring in some of the trades and say, hey, what is something that you guys have encountered in the past that might, because of the nature of this project, might be a risk that you guys will run into, and put it in your own risk assessment or in your own risk assessment matrix. Put it in your library, in your database, so that the next time you're assessing a project for risks, you can say, oh, that's right, the plumber said that this, flip through the database. Plumbing issues here, let's put those in. All right, the electrician, okay, don't forget all your regulatory things, like I said before, and all kinds of different things like that. One thing that really isn't too controllable, obviously, is the owner. He might want changes. Now, as a project manager, you might even have the power to flat out deny any changes and say, we're already too far past that point. We're going to get this done. You want to come back and change it? Be my guest, but we're finishing our project. We're completing our deliverables so that you can have your project on time and no delay. So it just kind of depends on the nature of your project. Let's see, any other types of risk? I mean, there's all kinds of different types of risk out there, from the environmental, like I said, the scope changes, external changes, technical things that happen that you need to make changes, or the designer needs to make changes, all kinds of lovely things like that. Now, to today's story involving risk. So when we were doing the project, and I've told this story before, but this is another little aspect to the story of when we were tasked to build the structure for a linear accelerator. Obviously, we had to excavate for large concrete caissons that were going 40 feet deep. So on top of the caissons, obviously we had the pile cap. Okay, so we were excavating for the pile caps, and then the drillers were going to come in and they would start drilling, and getting all the dirt out and everything. So our excavator was out there after we demoed, and we had to, we had to dig up, we had to excavate or over-X 3 feet, because that was actually, no, I'm sorry. We had to over-X 4 feet because the pile caps were 3 feet thick. So we had to go 4 feet and then come back in 6-inch lifts and then excavate. So during the initial excavation, removing the 4 feet, and we were over-Xing, all of a sudden the the excavator, the operator, stopped. And at that time, actually that day, earlier in that day, we had a meeting for that project. So myself, being the project engineer at that time, and my boss, who's the project manager, and then her husband, being the CEO, president, whatever, everything else of the company, we were standing there when all of a sudden we hear someone whistle. And then they turn off the excavator. And so we noticed it, all three of us actually, like, hey, why did it stop? And we turn around and they're clearing the site. And so okay, what's going on? So sure enough, the guy on the excavator comes to talk to us. So what he said was he felt something as he's excavating. He hit something. He wasn't sure what it is. And these guys are really good excavators that they usually can feel as soon as they tap something where, even an empty piece of conduit, they'll stop. So he had stopped. And, whenever they send out an excavator, because this was a small one because it was inside of an existing building, he has always someone there with him with the shovel to hand dig if he thinks he hit something. So he was thinking it was maybe a big rock because where we were working was actually a riverbed before. So he thinks maybe it's just rock. Maybe we hit some rocky material underneath, the dirt. Turns out he signaled his guy, his helper, to hand dig a little bit, and he started, going with the shovel, and he hit whatever it was. So he started kind of moving stuff around. He didn't want to bust it up. He said it's a piece of conduit. It's a big piece of conduit. And so everyone's like, what? So we started looking through the civil plans and things. And like, there's no utilities listed, and all the other plans, there was nothing. I mean, there was nothing running through the site. So they started uncovering it more and more. And so we're looking through plans and things, and no, we don't see anything. And we call facilities, and they're like, well, we don't know. As far as we know, there's nothing down there. And of course, they go a little bit further. They get about 5 feet away from the excavator, and sure enough, there's a big yellow, not the sign, but the big yellow sticker that's on the outside of the conduit, and it's an electrical line, obviously. But not just 3/4 conduit, 1-inch conduit, hell, even 1.5 inches. I'm talking about it's a good 10-inch conduit. And so when we take a look and say, well, where the hell is it going? Because it is literally running down the center, actually kind of skewed a little bit, running down the center of our job site. So we're like, where's it going? Where's it coming from? Where's it going? Well, of course, it's coming from literally, obviously from one side of the building to the other. And so even the facilities didn't know that it was there. So they came out, take a look at it. Okay, figured out it's a 480 kilovolt. That's 480,000 volts of electricity running through that piece of conduit. Unmarked, other than the label that's on the conduit. That was the only label, but how are you going to tell? No one knew that was down there. Excuse me. So we, the owner didn't have money. They asked, well, how much would it be to move it? It would be roughly 20% of the entire budget for that project, which as soon as they were told, they said, well, that's not an option. What else can we do? We can just reroute it. Okay, it's probably going to be like 3/4 of that. Said, no, we can't do that. So after some discussion, the team and I, we discussed this away from, the owner, because we told him we'll think about it and see what we can come up with. So we ended up talking to the structural engineer. Actually, no, not the yeah, that's right. The structural engineer who had designed the piles. And we asked him, is it possible to not necessarily redesign the piles, but relocate the piles in order to accommodate this line? And the engineer, said, hold on. Let me see if it's possible. I'll get back to you tomorrow. Of course, we were in no rush. We're like, it is what it is. Nobody's going to be on the site until we figure this out. Okay. Sure enough, the next day, the structural engineer calls us and says, you know what? I can work with this. We can what do you call it? Not redesign again. I can move the piles around. Luckily, we hadn't dug any, so that we can fit the structure on it. And I was like, okay, well, that sounds like a plan. Let's ask the entity. Luckily for us, there was no extra charge, obviously, because we're just there and we're just waiting to be told what to do. But the only thing that we actually did do for that was that we actually were, the owner paid us for it. That we found metallic tape. Tape actually sticks to the conduit. It's metallic. So then the next time, if they do a survey of the land with one of those meters or even X-ray, they'll be able to tell that it's a electrical line that's running through there, a high voltage line. So we did that, and actually they asked us to cover it in slurry, which we were perfectly fine with. So we submerged it in slurry, let that dry out for a bit, covered it up, and kept going with our over-X, or actually we over-X'd, and then as we were putting it back, that's when we did the slurry and put everything back, and then we went with and continued on. Now, that's one of those black swan, what do you call it? The black swan risk, because there were other things that were in the way. So the owner had money, had a contingency fund to deal with moving some of the some of the utilities around, like overhead, because we needed to make a vault that had 4 foot thick, 4 foot thick walls. Well, at the height of the wall that we needed to pour, because we needed to cover part of the ceiling also, there was a rack of electrical that made that 90-degree turn right there in the corner or in that hallway, and went to feed the rest of this building. Not the main hospital, but the rest of this building. And so they had enough money to reroute those, or those lines. That wasn't as big of a deal. So that's just something that you just can't plan for. Like it says, hard to predict. Although we know a lot that lines in this hospital, were in places where not that no one knew, but that the engineers and the designers didn't really do that much investigation. And so, we would open up, oh my gosh, there's all this conduit going through here. There's a bunch of plumbing going through, small stuff like that we could actually deal with. But this is one of those that there was no way for them to know. No way for anyone to know, unless the as-builts were done accurately, which obviously they weren't. So that was one thing that actually came out of there, that every time we did a project, me as a project engineer, or even the assistant project manager later on, since I had the knowledge and the background and the know-how to work CAD, I was actually in charge of doing the as-builts, where we would mark all the lines that didn't appear there before. So I was tasked to do that on this project. So before we covered it up, we took measurements of pretty much off of each wall where the line would be located, and made it as accurate as possible. So at the end of a project, you guys need to make sure that you go back, look at your risk register, look at what happened, what didn't happen. And when you do the post-mortem report on a project, you make sure that you include all of your what we learned. So what we learned is to make sure that we get any risks or any issues that came up, put those into our database or our library of risks that can happen. So then in the future, when we go back, when we start looking through projects, or if we're looking through bidding things, some of the risks might even be during the bidding process that you might be able to think of as you're looking at the plans. We're going to get started with this project, so we need to figure out, as we're making our schedule, what might go wrong, what can go wrong, how bad will it be, or how good it will be. But at least you have that. Now, going back to the definition that the Project Management Institute has for risk, we have to keep in mind that it said that, it's an issue if it occurs that can cause a positive or negative effect. Now, all these things I've been talking about so far are all negative effects. But what about a risk that could have a positive effect? Well, what if you're taking a look and the risk is that when you open up the walls, the plumbing is going to be so corroded, so bad, and you're going to have to replace it. So you're going to be prepared with the contingency fund. But what if you open the wall and lo and behold, someone has come by in another project, and all of a sudden now you have new piping, new plumbing. I don't even have to touch that now. Now you have money left over and you might have a day or two of, I just saved 2 days on my project. Let's assign it to float. Now all of a sudden, if something else goes wrong, now you have an extra day or two to deal with it. Okay? This is how you can have positive effects. Or what if the risk actually nets you money? Hey, there was a risk that this might happen, blah, blah, blah. Oh, guess what? We don't even have to contend with that anymore. Great. Check that off the list. That is not even a risk anymore. And now we have time and money. Right? Positive effect. Risks shouldn't be just seen completely as, oh my God, everything that can go wrong. Some things can go right. You always have to look at the silver lining. And the company that I used to work for, they always told me, Oscar, we need to be proactive, not reactive. Which is great advice. Which is why when you're going to take on a project, you need to be proactive and look through and try to identify as many risks for your project as you possibly can in order to come up with a risk management plan that helps in mitigating these issues. And hopefully they don't come up as issues. They can just stay as just low impact or less likely to occur. Okay? So I think that's the biggest thing we should take away from this. When doing risk management assessments, make sure that you're being proactive. And at the end of projects, make sure you're documenting all of the risks that happen that aren't in your database, and collect as much data as you can in order to put it into your database. That way, in the future, you can look at it and go, oh, that's right. I remember that. Okay, so here's what we need to do in order to avoid that risk again, or to mitigate it, to bring down the probability as much as possible from a very high probability to even to a medium, or maybe even possibly low risk, low probability of that event occurring and becoming an issue. Just some tips to go out there for you guys, all right? So that's about it. But let's go back to what I was saying about Saturdays, okay? What I want to do is take a look at some of the news going on here in the country and around the world as far as construction goes, and kind of cover some of that on Saturday. I know the last thing you want to do is talk shop and talk about work on a weekend. But I think it's probably also the easiest thing for you to kind of kick back and not have to read about things that are going on, look at your phone, or maybe even if you're watching this on YouTube on your phone, or tablet, computer, whatever, so that you can kind of just soak the news in. Let someone else tell you about it. Let them do the research so that you're not sitting there clicking here, clicking there. God damn it. Fucking ads are popping up. Let me do that work for you, okay? So I think we're just going to have news Saturdays. Not sure exactly how long the stream will last for those, depending on how much news is going on in our industry, obviously. But also we'll do that, and maybe even, certain states, if they have impacts on things, any new laws, I will try to get as much possible information to you guys as possible. So I'm shooting for this Saturday. All right, guys. The last Saturday in February. That's what I'm shooting for, to bring you the construction news. All right. So with that, like I said, I've said before in other videos, if you guys have any questions, you guys have any comments, you guys can always leave a comment below on this video. Please like and subscribe this video so that you can stay up to date on the different topics that I talk about and keep you up on the news for Saturdays. And what else do we have? There's all that. Emails. You guys can send emails for any questions that you may have that you don't want to put in the comments, or you would like for me to talk about or do some research on. From buildings, different buildings, to things in history, to anything construction related, I am willing to take on, you guys. Hell, even some electronics things here and there. So also I was thinking about doing a video about how you can kind of spice up your Zoom calls, because right now, because of the pandemic, a lot of us are doing work from home. So you have meetings, Zoom meetings or whatever software that you guys use. But there's this really neat piece of software that you may not know about that is pretty handy. And, because when you're on Zoom, you can click share your screen. or share my screen, I guess you would call it, so you can share your screen. But now it's just your voice, and your camera is nowhere to be seen other than it's your, the page that you're looking at. But what if you had something that at the click of a button, you can show your desktop and you can show yourself in the corner, bottom corner, top corner, hell, so right smack in the middle of everyone if you want. If you can point out different things around the screen. Yeah, this week, we saved a couple of days, or if you take a look, when we did the, you're looking at a spreadsheet, you can put yourself in the center. You can model your spreadsheet with a big hole in the center, so you can put yourself in the video. And then as you're talking, we ran the numbers, and here's the probability of this happening and this happening, or our sales numbers are this and this, and heck, show your RFI log. You can point to it on the screen if you wanted to, all kinds of fun stuff. And I think I want to make a video about that so I can show you guys, and that way I think it'll be a little more interactive for you, and it'll be a little more fun for everyone trying to figure out, how did you do that? But it's kind of one of those, like, I'm not gonna say it's a techie thing, because it's actually very easy to use. You just have a couple of things, and the best thing about it is it's free, and there's plenty of videos on YouTube if you want to upgrade it, if you want to do cool things. As a matter of fact, this is the software I use for my live streams. I use the photo editor for the border, obviously, but using the software is how I put my camera in the center, of my background, and I can move myself around. As a matter of fact, let's see here. Let me grab this. You see, you can move the camera around in all kinds of, wherever you want, like this, like that. You can resize it and do all kinds of other stuff. I'm gonna put it back in there for now. And you can even like shrink it so it's just your head, not like shrink the entire video picture, but you actually have your video picture like this, but then you can show just your head or just a corner, all kinds of different things. Okay, so I'm gonna do that. Hopefully within the next 2 or 3 weeks I can get that out there. Like I said, we're all still pretty much at home. Well, not all of us, but a lot of us, especially office personnel, are, thanks to technology, can now do our job from home. Actually, as a matter of fact, who was it? Someone pointed out to me a listing for a job for a project engineer. It says temporarily off-site. So you'd be at home taking care of RFIs, RFI logs, scheduling stuff, talking to superintendents, subcontractors, and all the paperwork, and rearranging documents, and sending them out, and all that stuff from home, thanks to technology. Okay, so like I said, I'm gonna go ahead and make this video so you guys can see exactly what this free software, easy to use software, can do for you, and how it can spice up your meetings. All right, cool. Okay, so construction news coming for Saturday. That's a definite. All right, and let's see, any major events. St. Patrick's Day is coming up. It's almost March. I can't really think of much else, you guys. So yeah, I'll see you guys on Saturday with the construction news. And until then, make sure you guys are wearing your PPE, mask up, social distance. Out right now, it's still going on, pandemic, and yeah, I heard some bad stuff for the future, for the next couple weeks. So it's not going away anytime soon, guys. Okay, even though we might try to be getting back to normal, it's not going anywhere. So make sure, mask up, wash your hands, social distancing. All right, but like I said, PPE whenever you're out on the job site. And as always, my friends, stay safe.